I'm Peter Underwood and this is News from the Water, except that I'm still on holiday there and this is instead a view of the future. Now there are still people alive who can remember the campaigns to save Britain's waterways from dereliction and abandonment under a British Waterways Board given the brief of reducing the burden of upkeep on the public books. Tom Rolt, Robert Aickman and Charles Hadfield saved many waterways through their formation of the Inland Waterways Association and what amounted to campaigns of civil disobedience, staging boat rallies where the BW board insisted they shouldn't be, navigating almost unnavigable canals to keep them open, and similar actions. And it's often asked where that campaigning spirit is today, when we see a neglected system being operated by an organisation that seems deaf to criticism and out of touch, certainly with boaters. So where are the young or even middle-aged activists willing to fight for a properly functioning canal system that delivers what boaters need whilst preserving our largest national heritage asset for the future generations? Well, unfortunately, the IWA no longer performs that function, having invested too much hope, I think, in David Cameron's creation of Canal and River Trust. The old hands who always wanted to see all the waterways under one body were beguiled by the promise that the Environment Agency waters would soon be passed to CRT and as a result cosied up to the Trust in an almost uncritical way, signing memorandums of understanding that left them virtually voiceless. Now there are some signs that it is belatedly dawning upon them that CRT is sidelining the navigations in favour of becoming something very different under its well-being agenda and has become increasingly unaccountable. But it may be too late. So, where is the hope for the future? Let's deal with the young. I've heard so many leading lights of the waterways bemoaning the fact that there are not enough young people involved in boating on the UK waterways. Now what they usually mean is that there are not enough youngsters doing what they did, becoming interested in the history of the working canals, raving about Bollinger engines and spending all their time trying to recreate the era when working boats and their crews carried 20+ ton loads of basic materials around the country for very little money. Oh, don't get me wrong, I love the sound of a Bollinger as much as any boater. And I love the fact that there are such enthusiasts to keep history alive on a living canal system. I'm just not convinced they're doing enough to ensure the waterways have a future as functioning navigations. But there are youngsters and some older people who are challenging the waterways authorities and winning. Ironically, they're the very people some of those old hands complain about. These are the youngsters who have taken to the water as a place to live, something they can afford in the ludicrously expensive areas like London, where even rentals have now become prohibitively expensive for anyone on normal pay. And buying, of course, is beyond their wildest dreams. Living in a wide variety of vessels according to their means and fulfilling, usually to the letter, their obligations to cruise and not overstay, they've identified a way of life that is affordable and suits their individual temperaments. Now these are not the poor and vulnerable of society, although boats also provide shelter for some of those people. These are often young people, sometimes of young families, in decent, middle-class jobs, articulate and enthusiastic. I've met on my travels fellow journalists, music producers, teachers, many others with degree-level jobs but rubbish salaries, who are part of the liveaboard boating communities in London and other popular areas. Organising through groups like the National Bargee Travellers Association, they have understood the politics of their situation and employed their skills to challenge Canal and River Trust's desperate attempts to extend its power over their community. The recent humiliating backdown by CRT over the River League so-called safety zones is the most recent example of a well-organised, effective campaign that's won the support of both the press and the public. They're putting constant pressure on CRT to provide proper and adequate facilities for boaters, and regularly challenge attempts at bullying individual boaters, with considerable success. Now, Canal and River Trust constantly whinges about London and the Western Kennet and Avon being overcrowded. Yet, we've only to look at the waterways of other cities to realise that, in other countries of course, to realise that with the right level of provision, there is scope for many more residential boats, both moored and moving. For many post-war years, our canals were dirty dumping grounds for the rubbish of the cities, as well as for the invisible people, the disturbed, the vulnerable, and the crooks and dealers that prey upon them. But where the boats go, things improve, and the public impression of the waterways improves. Boaters on the bank not only bring colour and character, they bring normality and security, even organising their own anti-crime patrols, as we've recently reported. And London boaters are slowly forcing that realisation on Canal and River Trust and even London councils. It is fascinating to see how the language of the more intelligent senior CRT people has been changing and softening, although of course some still resent the success of the NBTA and others like them and can get very petty about it. And it's not just London. We've seen a major rethink in Oxford, one of the most anti-boater councils in the country once, but now seriously debating encouraging liveaboard boats as a partial solution to its housing crisis. And that may be where the future lies. After more than 200 years, our waterways are no stranger to evolutionary change. We've gone from horse-drawn boats to steamboats to diesel engines, from carrying coal tar and pig iron to carrying people, from whole families left uneducated and sometimes starving in tiny back cabins to the toys of the middle-class retiree. Now boats are home to thousands, and some are older people enjoying their retirement. Some are refugees from the rat race, making a frugal living either ashore or afloat. Many are young, enthusiastic, hard-working, live afloat and love it. And alongside them, of course, are all the holidaymakers and owners of holiday boats, also wanting the best system available. The message that the authorities, including the Trust, seem unwilling to take on is that living on a boat can be a good thing for many, many people. It's interesting that a new charity is currently seeking abandoned boats in order to restore them as homes for former servicemen and women. The waterways provide a way of moving from busy and sociable to peaceful and alone for those who are left disturbed by their military experiences. It is indeed ironic that Canal and River Trust makes such a fetish of well-being, yet fails to recognise that living on a boat provides exactly that for so many people. Whether it's affordable accommodation or whether it's a retreat from the public, But instead of discouraging it with dark mutterings about how difficult it is in winter and how overcrowded it is in London and elsewhere, perhaps it should be encouraging it as a way of life. Now, the well-organised, united and determined young boaters of London are slowly pushing in that direction, and many others would follow if they thought there was a realistic chance that the Trust would shift its focus back to the navigations and providing properly for the needs of boaters. At the most basic level, it means keeping the waterways open and fully functional so that it's easy and simple to both move the required distances and more with ease. It means keeping the facilities open and working, and adding to them to reflect the number of vessels using any stretch of waterway. It means using offside land owned by CRT to create new residential moorings instead of flogging it off to any passing developer with an open wallet. And it means retaining and reusing the heritage buildings in CRT's care as part of the provision of these much needed facilities. It means working with local councils across the country, not just in one borough in London, to help make all this happen and make it easier to provide basic modern facilities on the bank, perhaps even Wi-Fi, to make living aboard more practical. Now, I think we're really lucky that there are now several thousand younger people with an understanding and a vested interest in boats and the waterways. I only wish Canal and River Trust, the Environment Agency and other navigation authorities had the foresight to stop fighting them tooth and nail and enlist that enthusiasm to ensure a different and better future for our canals and rivers. Forward-looking organisations like the National Association of Boat Owners already seem to be acknowledging that reality and consistently and heroically defend boaters against yet more attempts by CRT to further restrict their freedoms with tiny changes in terms and conditions and the such like. It would help enormously if the IWA and others like the RBOA did the same. I also realise there will inevitably be those complaining about having to slow down past even more moored boats and the usual evidence-free claims about not being able to moor. The canals wouldn't be the same without those complaints. And to those people I would simply say they should adjust their perceptions about the need for speed, tie a bit earlier in the day and enjoy the colour and interest boats add to any journey. If we want a fully functional, well cared for and attractive system of waterways in this country, we have to embrace a future in which more boats are homes, more young people and families enjoy those waterways, and their presence and enthusiasm bring sufficient pressure on CRT and government to bring our heritage up to the standards required. That's it for this week. See you again soon.
We need video and photos of all aspects of the waterways. Email files to peterunderwood2@gmail.com with your name and a brief description of it and where and when it was shot.